The jungle was alive with strange sounds. Huge trees rose like towers, their roots twisting above the ground. Dark green leaves blocked most of the sunlight, letting only thin beams fall on the damp floor. Every few seconds something hissed, clicked, or rattled in the shadows. It was the kind of place where even the bravest travelers kept their weapons close. Among the group of travelers walking through this dangerous place was an alien girl. Her name was Lyra, and her silver eyes showed both fear and wonder. She had never seen a jungle like this before. The air smelled of wet soil and sweet flowers, but under it was a hidden stink, the kind of stink that warned of rot, blood, and death. Her companions kept close together, whispering to each other. "Do not step off the path," one of them warned in a sharp voice. "Many have vanished here, swallowed by the jungle itself." But Lyra was curious, too curious for her own safety. Her steps slowed as she noticed something glowing between the trees. There was a patch of flowers shining with a soft blue light. Their petals opened and closed slowly as if they were breathing. A strange beauty called to her. She forgot the warning and moved closer. Just a quick look, she thought. Just one moment. Her boots sank slightly in the wet soil as she left the path. Behind her, the others did not notice, too focused on their own fears. The jungle grew quieter around her. Even the insects seemed to stop buzzing. She felt a chill, but her eyes stayed locked on the glowing flowers. Then the ground trembled. The soil beneath her shifted like a living thing. A loud creak echoed and the earth split open. Before she could scream, something green and wet shot upward. A giant maw lined with thorn-like teeth snapped around her body. Lyra screamed as the enormous carnivorous plant swallowed her whole. Its vines curled and tightened, pulling her inside its huge body. The jungle returned to silence as if nothing had happened. Her companions turned at last, but it was too late. They saw only the rippling surface of the giant plant closing again. Inside the creature, Lyra fought for air. She was trapped in a dark chamber filled with hot, sticky sap. The smell burned her lungs, and the liquid clung to her skin like acid. She kicked and pushed, but the walls pressed against her with crushing force. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears as she realized the truth. No one had ever escaped such a monster. Outside, the travelers ran in panic. "Leave her," one shouted. "She is gone." Nothing survives once taken by the jungle. Their voices faded as they fled down the path, leaving her behind. But not everyone in the jungle turned away that day. A human named Daniel, a wandering mechanic and explorer, was nearby. He was fixing a small machine at the edge of the jungle when he heard the distant scream. It was sharp, desperate, and unlike any sound of the animals he had studied. He stood quickly, his instincts pushing him forward. Through the thick trees, he caught a glimpse of movement. The massive carnivorous plant still writhed, its vines twitching as it digested its prey. Daniel's jaw tightened. Locals had told him about this plant, about how it devoured anything alive. But something in his chest refused to let him stay away. He knew someone was inside fighting for their life. He grabbed the tools from his belt, a plasma cutter, rope, and a sharp knife. His heart raced, and his mind shouted that it was madness. But his feet carried him forward anyway. The jungle seemed to resist his path, vines tangling around his boots. The air grew thicker, hotter, and every step felt heavier. Daniel pushed on, eyes fixed on the monstrous plant. He could almost hear faint cries echoing from inside its body, and he made a silent promise. "I will not let you die in there." The plant shifted as if sensing his approach. Its vines lifted high like snakes ready to strike. The glowing flowers around it pulsed brighter. Feeding its hunger, Daniel took a deep breath. Sweat dripping down his face, he had no plan, only courage and the will to act, and with that, the battle between man and jungle began. But deep inside the plant, Lyra's hope was fading fast. Her voice cracked as she whispered in the darkness, "Please, someone, help me." Daniel stood at the edge of the jungle clearing, his chest rising and falling fast. In front of him was the giant carnivorous plant, a nightmare of vines, teeth, and dripping sap. The creature pulsed like it was alive, each movement echoing with the sound of bones cracking. Inside, muffled and fading, he thought he heard a voice. Weak and desperate, he clenched his jaw, his hands tightening around the tools at his belt. Behind him, two alien traders who had seen everything were shaking with fear. "Don't do it, human," one hissed, eyes wide with panic. "No one returns from that beast. Leave the girl or it will take you too," the other added. "Her life is already lost. Do not waste yours." But Daniel didn't step back. He turned, his voice steady but sharp. If I don't try, she dies for sure. If I try, maybe she lives. The alien stared at him as if he had gone mad. No one risked their life for strangers in this part of the galaxy. Life was survival, not sacrifice, and to them, his words made no sense, but to Daniel it was simple. He had grown up on Earth, raised with stories of impossible odds. He remembered his father's words. When someone cries for help, you run toward the sound, not away. And now, in this alien jungle, those words burned in his heart. He pulled out his plasma cutter and tied the rope tightly around his waist. The vine swayed as if the plant itself was watching him. A deep rumble echoed from its core. Like laughter, Daniel stepped forward anyway, each boot sinking into the damp earth. The air grew hotter as he moved closer. The glowing flowers shook as though excited by his presence. Sticky sap dripped from the plant's maw, hissing when it touched the ground. Daniel raised the cutter, the orange glow sparking to life. The jungle around him seemed to hold its breath. Suddenly, a thick vine shot forward, snapping like a whip. Daniel ducked, rolling aside as it struck the ground. Splitting rocks with its force, he came up on one knee, cutter ready. Another vine lashed toward him, and this time he swung. The blade sliced through the green flesh, spraying foul-smelling fluid across his arm. The plant shrieked, a horrible sound like metal grinding on metal. The entire jungle shook as if it shared the creature's pain. Daniel pressed forward, cutting and dodging, his rope dragging behind him like a lifeline. The vines moved faster, striking from every direction. One wrapped around his leg, pulling tight with crushing power. Daniel shouted, stabbing his cutter down. The rope burned through the vine. Freeing his leg, pain shot through his body, but he refused to stop somewhere inside. He imagined the girl still fighting, still waiting, and he promised himself he wouldn't fail her. For Lyra, the world was growing darker. Inside the plant, the air was almost gone. Every breath burned her lungs as the thick sap pressed against her chest. She scratched at the walls with her nails, but they only sank into the slime. Her mind screamed that it was the end, yet in her heart, she held on to one thought. Someone heard me. Someone is coming. Back outside, Daniel climbed the twisting roots of the plant. He stabbed his rope into a crack, hooking it as he pulled himself upward. Vines snapped at him like hungry jaws. One scraped across his back, tearing his shirt and drawing blood, but he kept moving. Gritting his teeth against the pain from above, he spotted a swollen bulge in the plant's body. It pulsed faintly, glowing red from within. Daniel's heart raced. That has to be her, he whispered to himself. Without thinking, he leapt toward it, swinging his cutter in a wide arc. The blade sliced deep into the thick skin of the plant. Green ichor burst out, splashing his face and arms. The plant roared louder than before, shaking violently. Daniel held on to a root with one hand as the world swayed beneath him. He could see movement inside the wound he had opened. Something small and weak struggling, Lyra. He shouted down through the hole, "Hold on! I'm here! Don't give up!" His voice was raw, full of fire. Lyra lifted her head in the darkness, eyes wide with disbelief through the suffocating sap. She thought she heard him, a voice not alien, not cruel, but strong and human, she whispered back. Though her voice was broken, "Please, help me." Daniel's blood boiled with determination. He didn't care if the jungle crushed him, didn't care if he lived or died. There was only one choice left, to fight until she was free or until his own body lay beside hers. Inside the plant, Lyra felt like she had fallen into a nightmare. The world around her was not solid but soft and crushing. Walls of pulsing flesh pressed in on her body, squeezing her chest so she could barely breathe. Every breath burned. Every movement cut her skin on sharp fibers hidden in the slime. The sap was hot and thick, covering her face, her arms, her legs. It pulled her down deeper with every second. Her silver eyes stung, and she could hardly keep them open. She kicked, she clawed, she tried to push the walls away, but the more she fought, the tighter the plant seemed to close around her. The smell of acid filled her nose, making her cough weakly. Her heart pounded faster than ever before. This was death, she thought, a slow, suffocating death inside a monster that no one had ever escaped. Lyra's mind flashed with memories, her home, far away from this cursed jungle. Her little brother's laughter, her mother's soft voice. She had wanted to prove herself as strong, as brave, but now trapped and alone, she felt like a foolish child. Tears mixed with the sap on her cheeks. "Please," she whispered into the darkness. "I don't want to die like this." And then, through the thick walls of the beast, she heard it. A sound she could barely believe, a voice, faint but real, calling out, "Hold on! I'm here!" Her heart jumped, her body tensed with sudden hope. Someone was fighting for her. Someone had not run away. Lyra tried to shout back, but only a broken whisper came. Still, she forced her voice out. "Please, help me." It was all she could manage before her head dipped again into the heavy sap. Outside, Daniel was hanging by his rope. Sweat mixed with blood ran down his face. His arms ached from swinging the plasma cutter over and over, but he didn't stop. He hacked at the bulge in the plant's body, forcing it open. Each slice sent the beast into violent spasms. The vines whipped the air like giant snakes. Trying to throw him off, one vine struck his side, knocking the breath out of him. He almost lost his grip, dangling by one arm, but Daniel gritted his teeth and pulled himself back. "Not today," he growled. He jammed the cutter deep into the wound again, widening the hole, and for the first time, he saw movement inside. A pale face, eyes dim but alive. "Lyra, come on," he shouted. Her body was half buried in sap, but she was still alive. Daniel stretched his arm through the slime. His fingers brushed her skin, but the plant shrieked and tightened, pulling her deeper. Lyra felt the pressure dragging her down. Her hope almost broke. But then she felt a hand, warm and strong. Pushing against the darkness, Daniel's grip closed around her wrist. Her heart exploded with life. She was not alone anymore. She tried to move, to kick, to help him pull, but her body was weak, her strength almost gone. "Don't you quit on me!" Daniel shouted through gritted teeth. The plant's vines slammed against him. Wrapping around his waist, it tried to drag him away. But Daniel anchored himself to the rope tied at his belt. His body strained, muscles screaming in pain. He pulled harder, inch by inch. Lyra felt herself rising, sap sliding off her body. Air hit her face for the first time in what felt like forever. She gasped, choking, her chest on fire, her vision blurred, but she saw the human's face, covered in dirt, blood and sweat, but filled with determination. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "You came for me." Daniel didn't waste breath answering. He pulled her higher, free of the crushing chamber. But the plant wasn't finished. The ground shook violently. Dozens of new vines shot out from the earth. They lashed at him, tearing his back, cutting his arms. One coiled around his neck, tightening fast. Daniel dropped the cutter, struggling to breathe. But he still held Lyra with both arms. Refusing to let go, she was barely conscious, her body limp in his grip. But she felt his struggle. She saw his eyes burning with fire. Even while death coiled around him, he was still fighting for her. Summoning the last of her voice, she whispered, "Don't. Let me go." And Daniel answered with a growl of pure defiance, "Never." He swung his body, smashing the vine around his neck against a jagged root. The vine loosened for a second, and Daniel sucked in air. With a final surge of strength, he pulled Lyra completely free from the beast's stomach. They both tumbled onto the wet ground. Gasping for breath, the plant shrieked in rage, its vines thrashing wildly. The battle was not over, but Lyra was alive. The ground shook as the jungle beast roared. Its massive body pulsed, the wound in its side spilling green ichor. Vines whipped through the air like whips of steel. Every strike carried enough power to break bone or shatter stone. Daniel knelt in the mud, one arm wrapped around Lyra's weak body. The other holding a knife. Lyra coughed, her chest heaving as she tried to breathe clean air. The sap still clung to her skin, burning in patches. Her silver eyes fluttered open. Half blind with exhaustion, but she still saw him, Daniel, standing between her and the nightmare. She wanted to tell him to run, but her voice was too weak. The plant struck again. A thick vine slammed into the ground where they had just been. Daniel rolled to the side, pulling Lyra with him. Mud splashed high, leaves tore. The jungle seemed alive, echoing with the beast's fury. "Stay with me," Daniel shouted. He set Lyra against the root of a tree, just far enough to give her cover. Then he turned back, gripping his knife tighter. The plasma cutter lay several feet away, glowing faintly in the mud. But the vines blocked the path. Another vine lashed at him. Daniel ducked, slashing upward, the blade cut deep, and the vine snapped back with a screech, spraying foul fluid. The smell was worse than rot. It stung his nose and burned his skin. But he ignored it, eyes locked on the monster. Lyra tried to move, her body trembling. She saw him fighting alone, and guilt tore through her heart. This human, a stranger, was risking everything for her. She wanted to crawl to him to help, but her legs wouldn't obey. All she could do was whisper, "Please, don't die." Daniel's muscles screamed with pain. Every movement cost him strength he didn't have. He was cut, bruised, and bleeding, but he refused to stop. The jungle had tried to swallow Lyra whole, and it would not take her back, not while he was still breathing. He dodged another strike, rolling across the wet ground. His hand closed around the plasma cutter. The orange glow burst to life with a sharp hiss. Daniel rose to his feet, his face grim. "All right, you ugly thing. Round 2. The plant lunged, vines coming from every direction at once. Daniel swung the cutter in a wide arc. Slicing 2 clean through, the beast shrieked, the sound vibrating in his chest. But 3 more vines wrapped around him. Tightening like chains, the pressure crushed his ribs, forced the air from his lungs. His vision blurred as black spots crept in. Lyra's eyes widened in horror. She forced her body to move, dragging herself through the mud toward him. Her arms trembled, every inch forward felt impossible. But she could not watch him die for her, not after what he had already done. Daniel's cutter sparked as he jammed it against the vines around his chest. The heat seared through the living ropes, filling the air with smoke. One snapped, then another. He gasped in air, coughing, his chest on fire. The last vine squeezed harder, lifting him off the ground. His feet dangled as the jungle roared in victory. Lyra's hand reached out, finding a sharp rock on the ground. Her fingers closed around it. Her body screamed at her to stop, to collapse. But she raised the rock high and slammed it down on the vine holding Daniel. The rock cracked, the vine recoiled. Daniel fell hard into the mud, coughing, alive. Their eyes met. For a second, words weren't needed. Her weak act of defiance had given him another chance. Daniel pushed himself up, plasma cutter humming in his grip. The beast's massive maw opened wide. It lunged toward them both, its gaping mouth glowing with sap and teeth. Daniel charged forward instead of back with a roar. He plunged the cutter straight into its throat. The explosion of heat and light filled the jungle. Sap boiled, flesh burned, vines writhed in agony. The monster's roar shook the trees. Its body convulsed, tearing the ground apart. Daniel was thrown backward by the force, landing near Lyra. The plant collapsed, smoking and twitching. Its vines curled and stilled. Its glow fading into darkness, the jungle grew silent again. Only the sound of Daniel's rough breathing and Lyra's faint coughs remained. Daniel rolled onto his side, every bone in his body aching, but his eyes searched only for her. "Are you still with me?" he asked, voice raw. Lyra nodded weakly, tears mixing with the mud on her cheeks. "You saved me?" Daniel let out a shaky laugh, wiping blood from his brow. "Looks like we saved each other," he said. For the first time since entering the jungle, Lyra smiled faintly. It was small, broken, but real. The jungle was quiet again, but it was not a peaceful silence. It was heavy, filled with the smell of burned sap and scorched vines. The carcass of the giant plant twitched once, then sagged into the mud. Steam rose from the wound where Daniel had driven the plasma cutter into its throat. The monster was finally dead. Daniel lay on his back, chest rising and falling with painful effort. Every muscle screamed from exhaustion. Every breath cut like fire through his ribs. His shirt was torn. Blood streaked across his arms and neck. For a long moment he did not move. Then he heard a weak sound, Lyra coughing. He turned his head and saw her slumped against a root. Her skin was pale, still smeared with the plant's sticky sap. Her silver eyes flickered open, struggling to focus. Her voice came out in a cracked whisper. Am I still alive?" Daniel dragged himself across the mud to her side. He crouched down, checking her pulse with shaking fingers. "Yes," he said, his voice rough but steady. "You're alive. I've got you." Her lips trembled as if she wanted to smile, but only tears came instead. Her body was trembling violently. The sap had burned her skin in raw patches. Every breath she took was shallow and painful. Daniel quickly pulled off his jacket, wrapping it around her thin frame. "You need warmth," he muttered, though his own body was freezing in the damp air. Lyra blinked slowly, her vision blurry. Through her haze, she realized the human was protecting her again. Even after nearly dying himself, he cared only about her. Her throat ached as she whispered, Why would you risk everything for me?" Daniel's eyes softened, though his jaw stayed firm. "Because no one deserves to be swallowed by the dark while others run away." He pressed a hand against her shoulder. "Steady and grounding, I couldn't just watch." That's not who I am. She stared at him, her tears shining. To her people, kindness was rare. Survival always came first, yet here was this strange human who chose to fight a nightmare instead of abandoning her. Suddenly the ground rumbled again. Daniel froze, pulling Lyra closer. But it wasn't the plant, it was gone for good instead. Smaller creatures were crawling out from the underbrush. Long, insect-like beasts with shiny carapaces. Their antennae twitching, they circled the dead plant, clicking their mandibles. Scavengers drawn by the smell of fresh death. Daniel cursed under his breath. Of course. Nothing in this jungle stays quiet for long. He helped Lyra sit up, though she winced in pain. We can't stay here. If those things decide we're easier prey than the plant, we're finished. Lyra tried to stand but collapsed almost instantly. Her legs shook, refusing to carry her weight. Daniel caught her before she fell. Don't worry. I'll carry you, he said firmly. He lifted her into his arms, her body light but limp against him. She pressed her face weakly against his chest, whispering, You'll get yourself killed. Daniel managed a tired grin. Not today. Not after everything we've been through. With Lyra in his arms, he staggered toward the trees behind them. The scavenger creatures hissed, tearing at the plant's remains. The sound of ripping flesh echoed in the jungle. Daniel didn't look back. Every step was torture. His ribs ached, his cuts burned. His strength was nearly gone, but he kept moving, because the weight in his arms reminded him why he couldn't stop. Lyra clung faintly to his jacket, her voice breaking. You saved me. From inside death itself. Daniel shook his head. No, you saved yourself. You fought until I could reach you. Don't forget that. For Lyra, the words felt strange but powerful. No one had ever told her she was strong. No one had ever treated her as worth saving. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from something new. Trust, at last. Daniel spotted a hollow beneath the roots of an enormous tree. It was just big enough to crawl into, a hidden place away from the scavengers. He set Lyra down gently, pulling branches over the entrance to hide them. Inside the hollow, it was damp but safe. The sounds of the jungle dulled. Giving them a fragile bubble of silence, Daniel sat against the root. His body slumping with exhaustion, Lyra leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. Her breathing was still shallow but steadier now. He wrapped his arm around her carefully, sharing his remaining warmth. You'll be all right, he whispered. She closed her eyes, whispering back, Not if you weren't here. Daniel looked down at her fragile form. His chest tight, he had saved her from death. Yes, but somehow it felt like she had pulled him back from death too. From a life where he was just a wanderer with no purpose. Now holding her, he felt something different. Something worth fighting for. The hollow beneath the great tree was dark and damp. Roots twisted like ribs above their heads. The smell of wet earth mixed with the faint sour scent of sap still clinging to Lyra's skin. Daniel sat with his back against the trunk, his body aching from head to toe. But his arm stayed wrapped around the alien girl. Holding her close, Lyra trembled in silence. Every breath she took was shallow, burning her chest. The plant's poison still clung to her skin, leaving raw marks across her arms and legs. She leaned against Daniel's warmth, too weak to move. Yet in her mind, one thought repeated, I am alive because of him. Outside, the jungle whispered. Strange calls echoed through the night. Clicks and screeches from hidden predators. The scavenger creatures still tore at the dead plant's body. But the thick roots shielded the hollow, keeping the two survivors hidden. Daniel shifted, wincing as his ribs protested. He looked down at Lyra. Her silver eyes half closed, her face was pale. But even through the mud and bruises, there was a fragile beauty. She noticed his gaze and whispered, You're hurt too. Daniel gave a tired smile. Nothing I can't handle, he said, though his voice shook. His arms and chest were covered in cuts. Each one stung as sweat and dirt pressed into the wounds, but he ignored the pain. He had already made his choice. Her safety came before his. Lyra lifted a weak hand, brushing his torn shirt. Her fingers grazed the cut on his side, and she winced as if the pain were her own. You should not have done this, she whispered. No one would have blamed you for leaving me. Daniel's eyes hardened. I would have blamed myself, he said simply. And I don't run from people who need me. His words were quiet but heavy with truth. Lyra felt something in her chest stir, a warmth she had never known. For a long moment they sat in silence, listening to the jungle breathe. Then Lyra whispered, almost afraid of the answer. Why do humans care so much for strangers? Her people were taught to value survival above all. Compassion was seen as weakness. But this man had risked his life again and again without hesitation. Daniel took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the dark roots above. Because one day we all need someone to care. If we turn away when someone is in danger, then what makes us different from the monsters? His words hung in the air. Lyra closed her eyes, letting them sink into her heart. She had always thought humans were fragile compared to the stronger races of the galaxy. But now she realized their strength was not in their bodies, it was in their spirit. And in this jungle, that spirit had saved her life. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed from outside, both of them tensed. Daniel raised the plasma cutter weakly. Eyes narrowed, shadows moved among the trees. Glowing eyes watching from the dark. The scavenger beasts had finished with the plant and were hunting for more. Lyra's body stiffened in fear. Her voice trembled. "They'll find us." Daniel tightened his grip around her, whispering close to her ear. "Then they'll find out humans don't give up easily." He shifted her further into the hollow, placing his body between her and the opening. His silhouette blocked the faint light from outside. To Lyra, it felt like a shield, battered, wounded but unbreakable. Her heart raced not only with fear, but with something deeper, a bond forming in the shadow of death. The beasts sniffed near the hollow, their antennae scraping the roots. Daniel held his breath, every muscle coiled. Lyra reached for his hand, weak but steady. Their fingers touched, and she whispered, "If I die tonight, I'm glad you were here with me." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "You're not dying tonight," he said firmly. His voice carried no doubt, no weakness. Lyra believed him. Even against all logic, she closed her eyes, trusting him completely for the first time. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the scavenger beasts moved on, fading into the distance. Daniel exhaled slowly, lowering the cutter. The danger was gone, for now Lyra opened her eyes, tears glistening in the faint light. "You stayed," she whispered. Her voice was filled with wonder, as if the truth was still too heavy to believe. Daniel brushed mud from her cheek with his thumb. "Of course I did," he said softly. "That's what humans do. We stay, in that hollow, surrounded by danger and pain. A bond was sealed not by words, but by survival, not by blood, but by choice. And Lyra knew that this night had changed her forever. She was no longer just the girl who almost died. She was the girl a human had refused to let go." The first light of dawn broke through the jungle canopy. Golden rays pierced the mist, painting the roots and leaves in soft glow. Bird-like creatures shrieked from the branches above. The long night had ended, but the jungle was still dangerous. Still alive, Daniel stirred awake, his body aching as if every bone had been broken. He sat against the roots, his arms stiff from holding Lyra all night. The alien girl still rested against him, breathing slowly but steadily. Her burns were healing little by little. The worst danger now behind them. Daniel blinked up at the pale light filtering through the trees. For a moment, he allowed himself a deep breath of relief. They had survived what should have been impossible. But surviving was not enough. They needed to get out of this jungle. Lyra's eyes fluttered open, silver glinting faintly in the dawn. She gazed up at him with quiet wonder. "You didn't sleep," she whispered. Voice soft but steady, Daniel gave a tired grin. "Didn't want to take the chance of losing you after everything." She shook her head faintly. "You risked everything already. And for me," her words carried both gratitude and guilt, but Daniel only shrugged. "You're alive. That's all that matters." Slowly, he helped her to her feet. She was weak, her body trembling, but with his arm supporting her, she managed step by step. They moved out of the hollow and back into the jungle. The air smelled fresher after the rain. Though danger still lurked unseen, they walked for hours, moving carefully along the half-hidden paths. Every rustle in the leaves made them tense, but no beast attacked. Perhaps the death of the giant plant had sent a warning through the jungle, or perhaps the jungle itself respected the strange defiance of one human. Finally, they reached the edge of the settlement where Lyra's people had camped. Voices rose in shock as the two figures appeared, mud-covered, bloodied, half-broken. No one had expected them to return. Most had believed Lyra was dead the moment the plant had swallowed her. Yet here she was, leaning against the human who had dragged her back from death. Her companions whispered in disbelief, "That's her. She survived the hungry jungle. No, it's impossible." But their eyes kept drifting to Daniel. The battered human standing tall despite his wounds. One of the aliens stepped forward, his voice shaking. How? No one escapes that creature. No one. Lyra's voice trembled but carried strength as she answered, no one. Except with him. She looked at Daniel, her eyes shining with tears. He fought the beast. He pulled me out. He did not run when even my own people fled. The aliens fell silent, the weight of her words pressing on them. Their gazes shifted, some in awe, others in shame. Daniel felt their stares but said nothing. He was no hero in his own mind, just a man who had made a choice. Yet in their eyes he had become something far more. Whispers spread quickly through the settlement. From tent to tent, from trader to traveler. By nightfall, the story had already grown into a legend, a tale of the human who fought the jungle itself to save one life. Some said he cut through vines as thick as towers. Others swore he wrestled the beast with his bare hands, but in every version, one truth remained. The human did not abandon the girl, and he won. Lyra stayed close to him in the days that followed. Her burns healed slowly, but her heart healed faster. Whenever someone asked how she survived, she always gave the same answer. I lived because he refused to let me die. One evening, when the fires burned low, Lyra turned to Daniel. Her voice soft but certain. You changed me, she said. I thought strength was cold and ruthless. I thought caring was weakness. But you showed me wrong. Daniel looked at her, his eyes calm. Maybe it's not about being strong or weak. Maybe it's about choosing not to give up on someone. Her hand reached for his, their fingers intertwining. For the first time since her nightmare began, she smiled without pain, and in that moment, she knew she would never see him as just a stranger again. The jungle remained deadly, the galaxy still full of cruelty. But a seed had been planted that day, a seed of courage, of compassion, and it grew not in the soil of the jungle, but in the bond between a human and an alien girl. Years later, travelers would still whisper the tale around their campfires, the story of a monstrous plant that swallowed a girl whole, and the human who walked into the jaws of death to bring her back. Some called it madness, others called it bravery, but to those who believed, it was proof of something greater, that humans, fragile though they seemed, carried a fire in their hearts, a fire strong enough to fight even the darkest beasts of the galaxy, and that fire could change everything. In the heart of the hungry jungle, one human's choice became a legend, and for Lyra, it was more than a story. It was the moment her life was given back, not by fate, not by chance, but by a human who refused to let her go.